So tonight we are going to talk about raising morally excellent children, but also emotionally strong children. And so first, when our kids come out, we start tracking all these things. What are things that we track when our babies, we take them to the pediatrician for the first time, what do we track? Height, weight, bowel movements, right? We're tracking all the things. They're eating, sleeping, everything. Which are all great because physical and cognitive development is very important, right? We care about that. But what we care about more is going to be the heart development and the heart training of our children. And so with that being said, we're going to focus again on morals tonight and emotional well-being of our children. There is a book that we're going to talk a lot about. It's called Are My Kids on Track? It talks about social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So this is a really good book. We highly recommend it. But yeah, so the heart behind our children is what we care about. We don't just want little robots who do what we say because we said to do it, right? They need to know why. And so we're going to talk about that. And first we will start with morally excellent children.
Awesome. So like Jesse said, there's definitely overlap. There's another parenting class that we're going through on Sundays, and it talks about how the focus should primarily be relationship. That's I would argue one of the primary reasons God created the people in the first place was relationship with us. But then secondarily, we're to try and emulate that with our relationship with our children. So it's like the goal is not just to be right, to do good for goodness sake, right? It's the idea there is the connection of the relationship. And so when we talk about stuff like moral excellence, what's your standard? Is it just what dad says? Is it what mom says? Is it what society and the culture says? Is it utilitarianism? Is it like what the majority of people say? Is it the flavor of the day that can change over time? Like where do you get your standard for what is moral, what's right or wrong, what's good or evil? And it's interesting, you hear things like there's nothing new under the sun. In the same way, what do you hear Satan describe that, right? He is the father of lies. He is a liar from the beginning. And so it's like whenever he approached Adam and Eve, it wasn't about a tree and fruit. Like it wasn't about, oh, you ate the forbidden apple. It was about challenging God's moral authority. So God himself has the power to decide what's right. So what did Satan say? He said, did God really say? So he's questioning what God says. He says, if you eat of it, you too can be like God. You will have the ability to determine right from wrong. So look at the world around us today. I don't think it's that big of a deal to do this. Well, I mean, okay, what does it hurt if they live that way? People want to be God unto themselves. We want to be the source of all authority in our own lives. We don't like it whenever someone comes along and disagrees with us. Well, it feels right to me, so therefore I should act upon that impulse. Right? God made me this way, so I need to act on that. And if you don't acknowledge the reality of the fact that God's moral authority is the standard for God, that's kind of where we get into this problem, right? Where sin exists, whether it's my sin, whether it's the sin of humanity in general, it breaks relationships. And people go, I don't care, I don't want to be reconciled back to God, I don't even know if God exists or God is real. It's like, well, we're also told that one day, right, every knee will bow and acknowledge and submit that. So it's like, I can choose now of my own accord to acknowledge that God is that standard, and that God is that, or one day I will be forced to in me, right? So with our kids, when we're presenting them this moral authority, we need to make sure that what we're trying to do is faithfully represent the fact that mom and dad are broken and sinners, and we miss the mark too. And yes, we often are hypocrites. We may say one thing and turn around and do another. And if y'all don't, y'all are more than welcome to come up here, and I'll cede the podium to you, okay? But at least in my own walk, that's been the case, right? So once again, we just want to acknowledge, we want to promote the idea that there is a higher power, there is a moral absolute, and it comes from God. It's not just don't do this because I said so, right? We want to tie that back into ultimately because God said so. If you have issue with that, take it up with Him. Like that's perfectly fine. God invites your questions and your uncertainties, right? But a verse that I would give to y'all, it's called the Shema. Stands for to hear, right? It says Deuteronomy 6, show throughout the course of your day, when you lie down and when you get up. So that's first thing to start your day, when you end your day, when you're at home, or when you're away from home. So it's pretty much all the time, right? And so the idea with that is that's kind of the teaching that you hear and you see modeled by Jesus is this idea of as you go, right? It's not just come sit in the lecture halls and intellectually listen to all these wonderful things. It's like, no, put these into practice. Practically speaking, teach these to your kids, model these for your kids. As you sit around the dinner table with your kids, hey, what do you think that it means to be kind? What's something that you could do that would show self-control today, right? Just beginning to try and impart those things to your kids. And it's not that other study that we're doing on Sundays that basically just says, you can be right and you can write your kids right out of the house. Like, well, we were right, they knew right from wrong, but it's more so about reaching the heart. Right? They just become more sneaky, more crafty, right? They have the correct outward action, but the heart may not actually be there behind it.
So with that being said, God's word is our standard for moral excellence. But the important part to remember is that this includes everyone. God doesn't say, be respectful unless you have like a really defiant personality. He doesn't say that, right? What?
Or a bad day.
Or a bad day, yeah. So it's important to know that no matter what age, no matter what gender, no matter what personality type, we are all held to the same standard. Wyatt's held to the same standard that I am, and he. And so we want to make sure that we're not lowering standards to our children. My daughter is very different than my son. They're two very different animals. So I'm not going to say, Mason has a harder time with patience, so we'll just not really make him do that. We'll just make Paxton do it. We don't want to do that. And so we are going to raise our kids to the standard, not lower the standard to the kids.
And another thing is to tie on to that. So things you can make those excuses for. We don't make excuses for age, for gender, for temperament, for personality. You hear things like, oh, boys will be boys, right, as an excuse for destructiveness, rebelliousness. It's okay to be high energy. It's okay to be more hands-on, right? But at the same time, we want to consistently just, because if they find out, well, okay, this standard only exists unless I throw a fit or complain or push hard enough, like kids are smart. Like they want to know where those borders and those boundaries are. What can I do and get away with kind of a thing, right? And so it becomes one of these things where we've talked about earlier, there's definitely those years where it's more about discipline, it's more about no, quit, stop, don't. But then also we want to begin to move into those coaching and those teaching phases of stuff, and that's kind of what we're getting at here, where we're beginning to once again try and reach the heart of stuff, right?
And so with the standards, they have to have those standards in what we call a moral warehouse. We have to build up morals in our kids. They don't come out knowing how to be patient and how to be respectful. How do they come out? Selfish little beings, right? So we have to teach all of these morals, and if they don't have it in what we call the moral warehouse, so think about Walmart, when they're out of something on a shelf, they go in the back, they pull it from the shelves, and they restock, right? We as the parents have to continue to do that in our kids, because we'll start finding gaps once we start asking questions. Hey, if you saw someone drop something and they had their hands full and you were walking into church, what would you do? And if they can't answer that question correctly, they may just be like, run by. Like, you're like, whoa, we've got some gaps here in the moral warehouse, right? So the moral warehouse is something you will hear us talk about a lot just in growing kids in general. But it is something that we as the parents have to continue to build up.
I mean, that kind of ties into something you'll hear consistently is more is caught and taught. People hear what you say, but they see what you do, right? And so, said differently, that's why so much hurt, with the church exists, right? Is there's a line, I think y'all remember, like DC Talk back in the day, but they said, the single greatest cause of atheism in the world today are Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, but deny him with their lifestyle. It says that is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. So it's not this idea of sinless perfection, right? I mean, Jesus said, be perfect as I am perfect, be holy as I am holy. Like, that's the goal. Like, that's kind of what we're aiming for. But we also don't want to go, well, that's impossible, so I'm not even going to try, right? That's a quitter mentality. You're definitely not going to get there if that's the approach that you have with it. So with mom and dad, more is caught than taught, we want to make sure that we're doing our best with the help of God and friends and peers to walk the walk, right? So if I do as I say, not as I do kind of a thing, right? We definitely involve bosses or family members who report that from me. That's not fair, right? There's something in you that goes, wait a second, like that doesn't line up. So we definitely don't want to quote, it says like, in a world of uncertainty, don't let your relationship with your kids be one of those things, right?
The final thing we're going to talk about with moral excellence in our children is give the moral reason why. Anyone's kids in the why stage, why, all day long. It's actually okay to tell your children why. We actually encourage it. And so explaining the what but not the why is just head knowledge. Explaining the what and the why becomes heart knowledge. And like we said, that is something that we're aiming for with Moral Warehouse and moral training, is to just get them to really feel that in their heart, not just their head. Scripture memory is a great tool for this. We use scripture where we gave you a resource tonight, I think. The ABC verses are really great, and our children started learning those when they were like 18 months old. We have videos of Paxton and Mason both saying a scripture, and it's the cutest thing ever. But it does help in your training as well, because D is do everything without arguing or complaining. I think on that sheet, it is on ours. And so that one, all you have to do is say that to your kid. Hey, what's the letter D? Do everything without arguing and complaining. And they don't really like it, but they know it. And so it's hard for them to argue with scripture, right? When you're like, God said this, they're like, oh, wait, hold on. So with that being said, we're going to move into raising emotionally strong children. This is really hard. There are books out. There's one called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys, which goes against everything in our culture, right? Our boys are typically raised to be strong, shut your emotions down, and girls are the only ones who have emotions. So with that being said, Wyatt's going to start us off.
Something she said, what I was trying not to jump in on, when it says like it's okay to answer our kids' why questions, you want to make sure that they're not challenging. It's not a direct challenge to authority. So we introduce first time obedience in this one. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself like I always do, but it's okay to say yes, Dad, then why, right? If the question you genuinely understand, why are you giving me this rule? Why am I expected to have this, whatever? Like that's the part that we want to try and teach them. Because a lot of times, if you're on a project or at work or something, you go, here's kind of where we're trying to get to. It helps you to then more clearly see your role in that. You can kind of more cohesively move in that direction. You know the why behind it. So that was just a caveat where if it's just the why and it's just defiant and rebellious, that's typically still not an okay thing we want to do, right? Why for understanding is okay. So like Jesse said, the main thing we're going to be kind of referencing is this guy. This is Are My Kids on Track? And like she said, the reason that we track things, height, weight, walking, talking, all these other milestones, is that you're looking for delays. You're looking for, hey, should I be concerned? Are they on track to be where they need to be? Are they progressing at an appropriate rate? How do they compare to their peers, right? Everything. My kid walks before yours. My kid can say 20 letters, not 15. Like for whatever strange reason, it's everything becomes my kid's head's bigger than yours is. I didn't even know that was a thing, right? Head circumference, My kids win, they've got giant heads. So anyways, dad brag. But the very first chapter of this book gives, or the intro of this book gives like an awesome, I say awesome, very visceral, relatable illustration where it talks about a successful surgeon who's in his 50s. So physically, he's where he should be, 6'2", 220. Mentally, he's a doctor. He's gone through all the higher level academics and everything like that. But if you ask his kids or his wife or his nurses or his colleagues and his staff, he ruins and destroys every relationship he's in. His wife filed for divorce. His kids want nothing to do with him to be around him. He runs off all of his assistants and his nurses. Why? Because emotionally, he's a 12-year-old boy who screams and yells, cusses, throws things, throws fits, because he never hit any of these emotional milestones. Well, his parents probably were, oh yeah, he's he's in his growth curve. He's at high achieving in class, right? But he lacks empathy. He's incapable of even verbalizing his emotions or identifying the emotions of other people. And it's like, if you're not that person, you know people that are that way, right? And so reading stuff like this is kind of a step on the toes, kicking the shins where you go, man, maybe I do have some areas where I'm a little bit delayed or stunted myself, right? I need to work on these areas too. And it's one of those things where they say it's difficult to teach what you don't know. So if you yourself have these deficiencies and stuff like that, it's difficult to try and teach those to your children. And so, just like I said, we all probably know people who are stuck in some sort of a way, like, man, you're like my 5-year-old, where you don't get what you want and you lose your mind, and you're 82 years old, whatever. And it's normally it's accompanied by some sort of, I've been this way my whole life, I'm not going to change now, as though that makes it acceptable, right? Like that's one of those things where you go, that's kind of sad that you're stuck like that. So an adult who still throws fits when they don't get what they want, an adult who is angry, explosive, demanding to their kids and their spouse, right? I'm going to throw an emotional tantrum until I get what I want. An adult who doesn't have any close friends because they don't communicate well verbally or socially. They never learn to take an interest in other people. It's always, I'm not listening to hear, I'm listening to respond. I'm waiting to blurt out. It's always, I'm going to one-up what you have to say. There is no reciprocity. You kind of go, if you want to have good friends, you need to be a good friend, right? So what's our goal? Just like in our growth, like you don't want to go, oh, your kid is undernourished, you need to feed them more because they're not growing. You go, oh my goodness, and we would freak out, we would probably do something about that. Medical consults and all sorts of stuff, right? But if you go, your kid is stunted emotionally, and they are not growing in empathy or taking ownership or awareness of the emotions of others or like all these other things, we kind of go, or maybe we're even blind to that. You don't even know that that's something you should be looking at. You go, great, now I got to worry about 4 other things I didn't even have on my radar, right? But also, too, the spiritual milestones as well, right? So I would just argue that as important as so many of these things we're talking about, if my kids one day stand in front of God and they don't hear, well done, good and faithful servant, I have ultimately failed them as a parent. No matter how successful they are in their careers, no matter how many children they have, no matter whatever accomplishments that they go on to achieve, right? If they miss the mark there, I have utterly failed them, right? And so that's a burden on my own heart that helps you motivate why I do what I do as a parent. I have my bad days for sure. Definitely at times where that's not at the forefront of my priorities, but this is always one where we go through this and like, okay, let's get back on track. We need to make sure that we're focusing in on truly what matters most important.
Yep. So with the emotional milestones, tonight we're going to talk about 4 emotional milestones. The first one is going to be emotional vocabulary. This is simply reading and articulating our own emotions, and then we want to teach our kids to do the same thing. So if I cannot say how I'm feeling to my child, they probably can't tell me how they're feeling back, right? Or if you say, how do you feel right now? And they do not have a word to tell you, we've probably got some holes in our emotional vocabulary. Yeah, and that can become super frustrating when you don't know how you feel. So emotional vocabulary is a prerequisite to regulation, to practiced empathy, and to resourcefulness in healthy relationships with others. And so we're going to talk about those. But we want to be as thorough as we can. And so we're going to break these down into good ideas for your boys, and we're going to break these down into good ideas for girls. And men and women in this room are probably going to be like, wish I had that when I was growing up, or wish my parents did that. Or maybe I should start that today. So there's going to be some really good things, but we are going to break it down to boys and girls. And then before we do that, though, why it needs to bust a myth about emotions.
So I would tell you that it is a stereotype that typically men don't have or don't show or aren't as good at processing or expressing emotions. Is that like a fairly decent assumption that you would have heard? Men, they don't cry, or be a man, right? Looking at a review, you just hear things like that said, and that's not to say that they're correct, but the myth is that girls have more emotions than boys. They may express them differently, but some boys are really high on the emotional spectrum, right? Other girls may have grown up in a family where you don't have feelings, you stuff them all down, and you pretend that they're not there, right? So while the book tends to acknowledge that, we also want to make sure that we're speaking in generalizations, right? That all of these things are good. Well, with girls, you need to make sure that you those same things can also apply to our boys. It just depends on your kids, where they're at emotionally, developmentally. So we just want to put that out there. are certain things that psychologically and developmentally are true. So girls do typically develop emotionally at an earlier age than boys do. Has a lot to do with just brain development, maturity levels as well. But I think you have your outliers too. You have boys that do. I was one of those. I was the one that would get along with all the girls and all these gross, nasty boys that can't verbalize and vocalize all these things. I'm like, you guys drive me nuts. Like, I want to do.
And I'm the opposite. I don't do emotion. We didn't show emotion in my house, so we balance each other really well. But
It's a great
yeah.
relationship.
So with that being said, a lot of, we're going to say typically, because we know that there are those outliers that throw the science off. So we're going to start with ladies. Girls with emotional vocabulary need to feel safe. They need to feel safe to show emotion. They need to feel safe to not be okay and happy all the time. They need to know that it's okay to say the wrong thing sometimes. Like if they are sharing with you and they say something that is silly or doesn't make sense, we want to compose ourselves and not shut that down to where they're like, I'm not going to talk about this anymore because I just felt ridiculous saying that. So they want to hear truths with your words and your actions as the parent. So they want to hear you are enough whether you win or lose. They want to hear you are enough whether that boy tells you that or not. They want to hear we love you just as much when you mess up. So these are all things that girls typically like and need to hear from their parents. If your daughter does not feel safe, she is probably not going to share her feelings with you. And I can attest to that. So we also want to give our daughters models. We want to be a model, but we want to give several models in her life of what it looks like to live out strength, courage, and confidence, but also vulnerability and sadness and anger. She needs to see grown-ups in her life, men and women, express emotion and do it in a correct way. And so we want to have people, not just mom and dad. Sometimes Maren has talked about if someone else comes up to one of her girls and says, you look so beautiful today, that hits on a different level than just mom saying it over and over. So it's good to have other people in your lives to help with that. And then she just needs to know, like, God made her with these emotions and these big feelings, and that's okay for her to express those. So we want to just help her do that in a mature way.
It's important to note, so once again, this is a good one to go, hey, man, I'm sure I'm glad that we're using the Bible as our source for authority of morality, right, wrong, good, evil. So if you look at Scripture, it says, in the beginning God created them, male and female, He created them in God's image. They were created, right? So God Himself embodies all of these traits and characteristics and feelings and emotions. God Himself is not human, obviously, right? But the emotions, the feelings, the things that we have, they come from God. And so it's okay, like I'm glad that I had a dad who told me it's okay to be a tender-hearted, artsy, soft-spoken little boy who doesn't want to play in the dirt and play tackle football with his friends. Doesn't mean that something is wrong with you or you're deficient. That is how God made you. And those are attributes of God's own heart, right? Like what's the shortest verse in Scripture? Jesus wept, right? Was Jesus not a man? It's just one of those things. It's like, what do we look to, right? As our standards, right? So moving on to boys, relationship is kind of the bedrock of emotional development in our children. So kind of like she said, girls need to feel safe. The relationship that exists with our kids is they need to know that they can trust us, right? We don't need to betray that trust. Or they say it's like trust is gained in droplets and lost in buckets kind of a thing. I'm stealing from another lesson too, but we get to a point where there are moments where they'll open up the window of the private world and they'll let us see a glimpse of something that we may think is ridiculous. You know, we may laugh off or dismiss or something like that, but that's them trying to be vulnerable with us. And so we got to be aware of those moments with our boys or our girls because that can hurt or break relationship. If I tell my boys, oh, quit being a baby, you're being ridiculous, get out of here, right? Like, is he going to be as likely to come to me the next time that he genuinely has a fear or a worry or that something's like heavy on his heart? Maybe not. Last time I went to dad with this, he dismissed me, he rejected me, he insulted me, he told me that I was being dumb, right? So we don't want to knowingly or accidentally do things to try and damage or break that relationship, since that's ultimately how we try to relate to them, and they won't hear us if we time they come to us, we're always correcting as opposed to just listening. I'm 35 years old, been married for almost 14, 15 years. And I still have to go, hang on, can I have real quick? Are you wanting me to just listen, or do you want my opinion, right? Because I normally operate from a place as I am the authority. Like I'm a doctor, and so when people come in, I go, here's the thing, and here's what we need to do about it, and that bleeds into other relationships. And so there are times where it's like, I don't really need or want your advice right now. So I'm just venting. I'm just getting this off my chest, and it's like, it's helpful for me to remember that with my kids as well too. Like, do you want my advice right now? Because I'm happy to give it, right? Do I listen without always correcting? Sometimes, like, oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. Oh man, that sounds like that was probably pretty tough for you. Instead of just going, well, you should have done this, you should have said this, you need to try this instead, right? Same thing, unsolicited advice. So judgment, correction, unsolicited advice, those are ways that you can definitely damage or hinder or impair that relationship with trying to connect with your kids emotionally, right? So once again, we need to model and teach them active listening without necessarily listening to respond, right? So there's so many times I'm like, when are they going to quit going on and on and on about it? But my face hopefully doesn't say that, right? I'm listening to then change the subject or to throw my 2 cents in there. I'm not actually listening to understand or to hear, right? Think of your prayer life. How often do you genuinely sit there and God's like, when is he going to shut up? You know, it's like, hopefully he doesn't have that mentality. Like, he's been going on about this same thing for 15, like, get off of it, dude. Like, so just, once again, going back to what is our reference point? What's our basis? How does God deal with us? So same thing, more is caught than taught. Hopefully they should see us express emotions, see us navigate through them, or hear us identify them. I was about to say, I feel like that's the feelings wheel. Okay, all right. But they also, I forget the exact percentages, but there's a certain amount of, so much of communication is nonverbal. It's in your face, it's in your tone of voice, it's in your posture, you know, like, what did you say? You know, kind of a thing, right? So it's not enough just to control your words. You have to control your tone, your face. I'm like, wait a second, like this is asking a lot, you know? I got issues with that. I can be like one of the 3, but definitely not, you know. I said it in a happy tone, but it was rude words, you know? A for effort.
Yeah. So tools for your kids on emotional vocabulary. We gave you a feelings wheel. Mary printed that out for you guys. We just bought this one off of Amazon, and it's actually been really good for Wyatt and I to have to identify what feelings we're feeling. And like I said, in my house, we didn't do that. We didn't discuss or express feelings. If you have feelings, go to your room and you come out okay, like figure it out. And then on the back it says things I can control and things I can't control, which are great ways to talk through things with your kids. Another one that we got this week, this is more for littles, but it's excellent, talks about all these different feelings. And then on the back it says, when I feel silly, I can tell a joke, sing and dance, color and draw, play with a friend, exercise. So it has great pictures, and they can actually see the face, like, oh, she looks shy. We can discuss what that looks like. And then we can talk through it. So we've actually used these a lot this week because we knew this lesson was coming, and we've been reading these books and all these things. And so, again, we want to build up the emotional vocabulary, just like the moral warehouse, just like we talked about that. We're trying to build this up in our kids. You have to teach it. They don't know the word for shy. They don't know the word for embarrassed. Wyatt just took Paxton on her daddy-daughter dance date, and they came back. I'm like, did you dance? And she's like, eh. And I'm like, why? And so she was like, I think I would be sad with everybody watching. And I'm like, Wyatt said, do you think you would be embarrassed? And she's like, no. And he's like, do you know what that means? And so no, she had no idea what embarrassment is. So we actually had this on the counter, so we pulled it out and had a great lesson. So
I'm not trying to tell you how you feel, but
yeah.
word doesn't mean what you think it means.
So again, we want to ask lots of questions. We want to notice when our kids are tearful. Like our daughter cries in every single Disney movie she watches, every single one. And so we get to talk through that a lot.
The parents always die. Disney's brutal.
It's rough. And so, but emotions are part of life, right? And just like in Disney movies, like people die, kids have emotions. So we want to teach them how to vocalize that.
Those are also good ways. So we talked about the feelings wheel. Like, we're not there yet, but when we talk about technology, and it's not just a no, it's all bad, cell phones, smartphones, TV shows. It's like, use it well, like it's a tool like anything else, use it constructively. So with stuff like this, movies, TV shows, all that kind of fun stuff, you can use those, let's hit pause. What do you think that that person is feeling right now? And very expressive, like animations or real stuff, actors and actors where they try to communicate and convey what they're feeling, right? Like that's a successful person when you genuinely believe, oh, that's not a person playing a role, like they're actually going through what they're going through. So those are just very good teachable. It's harder in life to go, let's hit pause. What do you think this person's expressing right now? What emotion and feeling do you think they have? But like she said, just continue to try and arm them with those vocabulary and use those as teaching moments, right? So another emotional milestone is perspective. This one's kind of hard. I've read this chapter several times. I'm like, what are they getting at? Perspective is like the scale of something. Like, is this a 10 or is this like a 2? It's am I dealing with this in an appropriate manner or level? It's as a dad not losing my mind whenever something truly is a 1. They spilled the milk, it made a mess. It's very frustrating. We just cleaned the floor, but it's not a 10. And I like trying to teach that appropriate perspective to my children. Like, hey, it's a little more okay to have some bigger emotions when it's a bigger deal. It's not to say that you can't. It's not like I'm trying to curtail those things, but just trying to, it's not suck it up. It's like, hey, everything's okay. Take a deep breath. We can fix this. And that kind of ties into resourcefulness as well too, which is another thing that we'll teach on here in a second. But another thing too is emotionally, you can kind of go, hey, the level that you're at does not seem like it relates to what's going on. So is there something deeper? So hangry. Like, how many people are genuinely, it's a stupid Snickers commercial, right? But there's truth to it. Like, you're not yourself when you're hungry. There are some people that are like, I will straight up knife you in the back alleyway until I get like, oh, and then they're like a gremlin. They're like, oh, I'm happy now. I'm fed and I'm happy. But like recognizing and identifying those things, like, hey, let's get some food in. And it's not an excuse. It's like, oh, I'm just hungry, so I have an excuse to be rude and ugly and hateful and pissed off all the time, right? But it's just beginning to try and connect the dots for our kids or for ourselves, right? Also, it says like an emotional kid has no ears, can't hear. So if they're losing their mind, now is not the time for a lecture, right? You'll hear us in other lessons talk about a time of non-conflict. Like, hey, after the meltdown would be a great time to go, hey, earlier when you lost your mind because I told you no at the store to the whatever thing you had in your hands, why did you react that way? What made you think that you needed to have that? Are you appreciative for, a little bit more of a teachable moment than during the meltdown, right? Don't talk to me when I'm mad. I know I'm mad and I know I'm being ridiculous. You come up and go, you're being ridiculous right now. Gasoline on fire, okay? It's like, I'll show you ridiculous, double down. So not proud moments, right? But perspective and self-regulation, they go hand in hand, right? So that's kind of what we're trying to get to is we will not always be there for our children. We don't know some adult won't always necessarily be there. It's like we can't give them these tools and equip them from an early age, and they become the 50-year-old surgeon who ruins his marriage and is divorced and is divorced in his job and all that stuff because we didn't help teach them perspective. We didn't help them give them the gift of learning how to regulate themselves. There's always mom or dad coming in and taking them out of the situation and cleaning up the mess for them and fixing all the broken relationships. Well, what happens when you're gone? Now it's on them. They need to be able to self-regulate in those regards. Specifically with boys, boys are hands-on for the most part, understandably. There's truths to all of these, but tactile, kinesthetic, visual, spatial, experiential learners. My teacher over here, those are buzzwords that she'll like. Boys learn by doing.
What word did he not say? Auditory.
Listening.
Boys are not typically auditory learners, okay? That's important.
Yeah. So they will develop perspective by seeing things firsthand, experiencing it. So that's one of the other ones that she read at one point that was like, with your boys, engage in some sort of an activity, and there's like, but think of it with men, hunting, fishing, like how many male activities involve, I've heard them called third things, right? So if you want to have like a heart-to-heart connection, there needs to be a sitting around, a cigar that you're smoking, a deer stand that you're sitting in. There's something that therefore helps to fuel or feed that connectedness, right? So it's that same thing of get in there, get alongside them, and hey buddy, come help me do da-da-da-da-da. And then hopefully they start to open up and give you a little bit more of a peek behind the curtains.
A good example with boys in this is if they're not eating their food that you have made for them, don't lecture them about the kids across the world who have no food and would eat every
Starving
bite
children
they
in Africa.
Take him to the food pantry and let him serve people in the community that need food, and let him see it rather than just lecture and lecture and lecture. That's not going to hit anything inside of him, most likely. So with girls, they are typically better at self-regulating. This is mainly just due to more serotonin in a girl's body. That's just part of it. Which means that they typically have better self-control. Where they do have better control and they might conceal emotions more, that is not the same as self-regulating. So with our girls, we do not want them to stuff emotions, but we want to actually help them process and regulate through the emotions they feel.
Why did I just have frozen? What did you say? Conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. I'm like, wait, what? No, don't do that.
Yeah. So perspective is foundational in all our kids, girls and boys. It's foundational when they get married. It's foundational when they try to keep a job. It's foundational when they're trying, as a dad, he's trying to control his anger. Or her daughter pushes her away because she's sad. Like, this is very big. Self-regulating, we all do this as adults. Or if we don't, we have to learn from that, right? We have to self-regulate ourselves. So we want to teach this to our kids. The third milestone we're going to talk about is empathy. Romans 12:15-16 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Empathy is interesting because it comes more naturally to some people than to others. Some people naturally think of themselves more than they think of others. And that's just how you're wired, okay? But empathy means a shared feeling rather than one just expressed. It thinks of someone else and not yourself at all. And so this is what we're trying to get to with our kids. Adolescents are really good at thinking of who? Themselves, right? And so this is a muscle. Empathy is a muscle, just like any muscle in your body. We have to work it and build it to make it stronger. And so we have to work on empathy, not just in our kids, but in ourselves.
So Philippians 2 says, do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility consider others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you live in a multitude of interests, but also the interests of others, basically. And it goes on to just say, consider Christ Jesus, our example, who though he was God, he did not count equality with God as something to be grasped, but he emptied himself and humbled himself to the point of servant, to the point of even death on the cross, right? And so, just in that, we go, man, I am terrible about empathy. I don't care what you're feeling. I'm worried about what I'm feeling, right? Like, I look at a situation, but how does this affect me? Regardless, and that's just, like she said, that's how we're wired. So, I'm going off of today, cultural kind of stuff, like you do you, listen to your heart, do whatever feels right. If you were born that way, that's how you're supposed to stay. I'm going, no, that's terrible. The call of the Christian life is to come, but it's to come and die. Like, we're to die to ourselves. That's the primary thing you hear echoed through all the scripture. I'm going, that's hard. I actually don't like me all the time, but I'm fairly attached to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, wait a second. If I die, then if I look out for other people, who's going to look out for me? Right? That's kind of how I feel in that regard, right? But, so boys with empathy, there's like an age aspect of it. Typically your 2-3-year-olds, they don't even have vocabulary at all, let alone emotional vocabulary. But typically between like the ages of 8 are going to be those years where you start to see more of the loving, tender, courageous, imaginative, developmental time. There's a lot of big emotional development that occurs there. For those of you that have boys before that age, be looking forward to that. Shape them, guide them, point them in that direction. For those of you that have boys beyond that age, same thing we're talking about. The sooner you identify the fact that you were on the way to Florida, but now all of a sudden you find yourself in New York, you go, wow, I probably should have realized I was off track a couple 100 miles ago. So it's that same thing. It's not too late to intervene or to course correct. Actually, it's wise to identify those areas sooner and get back on track sooner. So you go, oh, beyond those years, we missed the mark, we'll never have empathy, we're just not even going to try. It just may take more intentionality, more time, more effort to get back on track, right? We can't talk empathy into people, but we do need to help practice it and make connections. So just like Jesse said, it sounds so silly, in my head at least, to think of something as, man, this is exercise. I've consistently exercised since I'm 13 years old. I'm 2 decades deep on this. Okay, if I want to get stronger at something, repetition. I can't just expect to do a movement one time and have it mastered. I can't expect to just throw 400 pounds on something and get it right away. I've got to build up to it. And so I've tried to mentally, in these instances where I'm tempted to be incredibly impatient, here's an opportunity, here's a rep. I'm on my 3rd set today. I need to, if I want to grow in this area, I need to do the hard work of it. So looking at it as an opportunity for growth, or as a challenge, just as opposed to the inconvenience. This is stupid. I can't believe this is the 4th. Who prayed for patience today? Because I'm getting all these opportunities to try and practice it, and it's not there, God. I'm reaching on the shelf, and my warehouse is empty. Just trying to approach it from that mindset. Instead, it's been interesting. I don't know, for me at least.
Yep. So with girls, they typically are emotional and intuitive. Even 5-year-olds and girls are intuitive to other people's feelings. They are emotional themselves. And so we want to help our girls build awareness of others. We want to get them to look out and not just into themselves. Girls, I can speak for most women probably, we have a tendency to compare and to try to measure ourselves up to other women or girls, even at a young age. My daughter, I was telling Marin, it hurts my heart because she's 6, and she already is noticing when people are watching what she's doing, or if her clothes aren't like someone else's at dance, and it's how does this start so young? But that's just, girls are like that. We're intuitive. We look to other people. We try to see what everyone else is doing. And again, that's typically, but this is a really good saying from the book, and if you want to write it down, I'll say it twice. Awareness is where empathy starts, and humility is where it swells into fruition. So awareness is where empathy starts, and humility is where it swells into fruition. And so we want to teach humility to our daughters. C.S. Lewis says not to think less of yourself, but to think of yourself less. And that is what we want to teach our girls. We want to teach them to look at other people and their needs and their feelings rather than just their own. And again, we have to practice it because it is learned.
Yep. So going back to that Philippians 2 verse, it says, let each of you look not only to their own interests. So it's not saying you can't look out for yourself, but it says not to look out only for yourself, right? And I don't know, I have issue with that sometimes because it's frustrating. I'm all right, God, I get it. They're more important than I am, right? And that's not what God's saying. He's you also just need to broaden your scope, right? It's not just about you, it's you and other people. But my tendency is to just stay focusing on me, right? The final emotional milestone is resourcefulness. We talked about this briefly earlier. That's the idea of successful parenting, is that those of us in this room don't become the parents who go to their kids' first job interview with them, that don't call up their college professor and go, why are you failing my kid, right? And it's we laugh, but those legitimately are things that happen, literally, in this day and age. I get them where I've got mid-20-somethings who their mom makes their dental appointment. I'm dude, you're 26 years old. I was married for 5 years by this point. What's going on? I say that in my head. So
self-regulated.
That's right. Boys and resourceful. I'm getting there. One step at a time. Most boys enjoy challenges. They're eager to find a solution. They're wired for action. There's a book called Wild at Heart. Talks about kind of the way that God built men, built boys, and it's basically every man or boy wants a damsel to rescue, an adventure to win, kind of a thing. It's that's how God has wired us and built us. So a lot of those action and emotion and those strong feelings and the way that we're kind of wired, it's we don't want to neuter them. We don't want to, hey, the way God made you, toxic, that's the thing that you hear, right? Boys should be women and women should be, there's a lot of confusion that goes on in the world today, right? But we want to speak positive identity over those attributes of our boys and of our girls, right? So we want to help them to control and constructively aim and channel and harness and direct those emotions. So fire or big strong horse, they're dangerous in the wrong settings, right? But in the appropriate uses and when harnessed and directed appropriately, they're used for great good and to accomplish major things. So we also want to teach them restraint, and these are swear words in my brain, but delayed gratification. Oh, I want it now, right? Amazon, same day shipping, Instacart. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. Like our whole world tries to play into that convenience. If your eyes find it nice, then you should. If you want it, you can get it. Go. I mean, that's like a modern pop song right there. You know, if you want it, go get it. You know, if you have it, you deserve it. But we want them. This is preaching at me to respond rather than to react. Filter. You know, just fire at will. Just whatever I think comes right out of my mouth. There's no thinking behind it. You know. And there's a whole book of the Bible that speaks against that. So Proverbs, you know, just one says like good sense makes one slow to anger. It's to a man's glory to overlook an offense. Anger's like a hot emotion, right? Mad, so I act, I speak, right? There typically is not a let me think through this, let me process. Now, okay, let me still go ahead and bite your head off after I've stewed on that for a while. So we just want someone to try and channel that, direct that, set them up for success. Like she said, with their own spouses one day, their own family, kids, peers, work, all that kind of fun stuff, right?
And so with the girls and resourcefulness, the book said girls are adventurous, insightful, capable, and strong, often more so than we give them credit for, but they have seen a decline in girls' resourcefulness, and this is because we just start taking control. Moms, parents, we start doing it for them, we start finding the answers, we start overstepping, and so they don't have to be resourceful because they just go to mom and dad. And so with our daughters, we want to teach them to find motivation. We want to find what motivates them by asking questions. So what do you want to see happen in this situation? What do you think would help in this situation? And let her vocalize it and think through it and then help her take action. And so girls need confidence. We want to encourage her to make decisions, to stand up for herself, and to be independent. Too often, girls just don't have the confidence to do those things. And so we want to build that up in them. And then we want to give her opportunities to grow in confidence. That might be putting her in a place where she really has to be determined to do something, and it's going to be hard. But that's going to build in, confidence. And that's also going to build independence, and in doing so, resourcefulness. So, again, this was a lot, but we tried to break it down for girls and boys because we know there's not just girl moms, there's not just boy moms in here, like we've got everybody in here, right? So, with that being said, this book, that was like a snippet of the good stuff in this book. It has so many tools and application pieces, and then like Wyatt said, the spiritual milestones are our goal. Like, that is the goal. So we discussed emotional tonight, but there's still social and spiritual that are really, really good. So if you get the time to read this, do it. But we're going to take a break. We're going to eat cake. It is chocolate sheet cake tonight. Use the restrooms, and then we'll break into our two small groups. So go ahead.